name is Jim, and we're going to be talking about this drill bit sharpener today on
Kilimanjaro.
This is the Drill Doctor Model 750EX. This is their top-of-the-line model, and it'll handle bits up to 3/4 inch in diameter, all the way down to 3/32 of an inch. It'll handle all different angles from 118 up to 140 degree, and it does split point on any of those angles as well. So if you've got a 135 degree bit used for stainless steel with a split point, you'll be able to sharpen that on this as well. It'll deal with any different drill bit material, either high-speed steel or carbide. It does have a diamond wheel in here, so we'll be able to sharpen carbide, although I imagine the life of that wheel is going to be reduced pretty heavily if you're sharpening carbide all the time. It'll deal with any of the different coatings. Of course, it won't be able to put those coatings back on, so if you have a black oxide, a TIN, anything like that, it'll sharpen that, but it's not going to have the coating on it anymore. Now, of course, if your bit is dull, that coating is likely long gone anyway, so not the biggest deal in the world. In the box, you get the drill bit sharpener itself, you get the chuck that the drill bits go in, you get a nice little instruction manual here. This is about 30 pages long, and it's all in English. There's some good information in here on how to use the machine, as well as how to make various adjustments to either match the drill bit you're using, or if you want to change the profile of that drill bit, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, and that's all detailed in here. Now, of course, there's also a couple pages of silly warnings, like don't go stand on top of this. Not sure why you want to do that in the first place, but it tells you not to do that anyway. You also get a little bag here. Not the nicest bag in the world, but not a big deal. This isn't the sort of thing that you're going to be carrying around all the time, so generally I just keep this in a drawer. Don't really need a bag to begin with. And then lastly, you get a little wrench to change the grinding wheel that's in here. Now let's talk a little bit about why you might actually want a drill sharpener. Now, a lot of people will say you shouldn't bother sharpening your drills. Drill bits like this, 1/4 inch drill bit, they're like $2 or $3. You can get ones that are pretty nice quality, made in the US for $3.50 from Grainger. So there's not a lot of point in sharpening bits like that when you can just get one factory sharpened, which is going to be a better sharpen than what this can do, for very little money. Now that's a reasonable point, because by the time you get this out, get it all set up, remember how to use it, you're going to be spending a couple minutes doing that. You're better off just going and buying a new bit when it's one of these that are, your standard bits that are about 1/4 inch or so. However, there are a couple different use cases where you might really want to have something like this. One of those is if you've got a bigger bit. So this is a 3/4 inch drill bit. It was about $40. Don't want to go replacing those all the time, and it would be a lot more beneficial to sharpen those on something like this. You can also get some kind of specialty bits. This is a very long drill bit. This, it was fairly expensive, and this would be nice to resharpen on here, except for the fact that this is a, electrician's bit, and it's got a very sharp point on it. So this will go up to 118 degrees. This is more like a 90-degree point on here, and so we won't be able to sharpen this, although I could probably grind this down to be close to that, maybe grind that on a grinding wheel down to, 118 degrees, and then finish it up and sharpen it in here, if I really wanted to. So the other situation where I find this to be really handy is when I don't happen to have another bit on hand and I'm in the middle of the job, maybe it's a Sunday evening or something, everything's closed, trying to get something done, and I realize my bit is very dull and I don't have a spare one. I try to keep a couple spares of all the various sizes. I have a couple different sets, but never fails that either I can't find it or all I've got is a dull drill bit and I want to get something done. I can take this out, sharpen the bit, and get right back to work. So it's very useful for that instance. The unit itself is made in the US, which is great to see. It is, however, mostly plastic. You can tell, though, that they tried to increase the quality of this version compared to some of the lower end ones. This piece over here is all metal. There's a couple other metal pieces in here to kind of keep everything aligned. I don't know that it really needed to be, but it's nice to see anyway. The motor doesn't sound that great. But of course, it's just taking the little bit off the end of a drill bit. It doesn't have to be some big induction motor. Obviously, I'd love it if this was some big hunk of cast iron, but it's only $150, and you can't really expect that much at that price level. So let's get a drill bit out. This is a 1/4 inch drill bit, and I'll show you how it works. First, you take the drill bit, you slide it into the end of the chuck here, just like that. It doesn't need to be positioned particularly precisely at this point, and just kind of snug it up a little bit. Then you take it and you align this tab with the 118 degree mark here. Stick that in there, slide it in all the way, and then you have to spin the drill bit so that these little wings that are here catch in the flutes. If you don't do that, it won't be lined up right and you'll end up cutting into the flutes instead of sharpening it, and it won't work very well at all. So you got to make sure that's in there right, and then you can tighten this down as long as it's pushed up against that stop there. Now that stop determines how much material is going to be taking off, and this little knob in the back here, you can adjust how much material you're going to take off, if you just want to take off a tiny little bit, or if you want to take off a lot because you've got like a nick in the blade or a chunk missing from it, you can take off a whole lot and repair that bit up to good shape again. So once that's set, you tighten this down pretty tightly, then you can pull it out and finish tightening it so it stays in place. Then I'm going to turn it on in a second here. You align the white mark with the dowel, and then you just rotate it by hand. You have to do both flutes, so I'll go back and forth on one side, and then go to the other side and go back and forth, and just rotate it until you stop hearing it grind. And that means that it's finished being sharpened. So let's turn it on and do that. There, it's finished. Pretty easy to do. It doesn't take too long. You can see that this whole thing kind of rocks as you're rotating it. And that's to keep the grinding wheel aligned with the cutting edge there. So it works pretty well. So now if you want to split the point, you can take this little cover out on the side here, take this off, align the white mark with this little groove here. Let me turn it back on. And then we just plunge it in. Then we flip it over to do the other flute. And just like that, we have our bit. We've got two different ways I'm going to see how good of a job it actually does sharpening the bits here. So the first is I'm going to look at it under this cheap little microscope here, and then we're going to take it over and actually see how well it cuts. So if we look at it under the microscope here, we can see that it did a pretty good job, but you can see some pretty heavy scoring marks, and you can see that there's a kind of a burr that's rounded over, which makes sense, right? It's only going in from the one side on here. It doesn't get to the back side at all to kind of clean up that burr. So it leaves a reasonable job, but it is fairly coarse. It only uses a 180 grit wheel, kind of a coarse wheel, but that helps it take material off a little bit faster. And it doesn't get to the back side, so there's not that much it can do on that end. If we compare that to a factory grind here, so this is a Chicago Latrobe bit. This was about $3.50, not very expensive. So if we look at the cutting edge on this bit here, now first we can see a little bit of rust on there. That's probably just because this was sitting around for a long time. I did just buy this the other day, but they must have had it in stock sitting around for a little while. These are all black oxide bits, which is, the black oxide is supposed to help prevent that rust, but there is a little bit on the tip here. I don't know that it's going to really affect your cutting performance all that much, though. If we take a look, though, we can see that it's a much smoother grind. It's nice and, it's not polished, but it's you can't see any big grit marks or scratches on the end of it. So it looks very nice, except for those rust marks that are on there. If we take a look at the next one, this is a CLE bit, also made in the US. Both this and the Chicago ones were made in the US. And if we look at that here, we can see that this one looks really nice. It's really well ground. You can barely see the scratches from the grind marks on there, and it comes to a real nice sharp edge on it. So that one looks really nice. And then lastly, this is a Westbird bit that was made in China. So this one was only about $2. Let's take a look at this one here and see how that one looks. So you can see that, well, first off, there's some dirt on there, but clean that off. This one doesn't look nearly as nice as the other two. You can see some of the grind marks, and it's a little bit of a ragged edge on the end. All three of these bits are brand new, by the way. So you get what you pay for to some extent. The other two bits here, although this one is a little bit rusty, the grind on them looks much nicer. And they all look a lot nicer than the one that it did here, that the drill doctor did, just because it has a fairly coarse stone and can't get to the backside of that cut. So we're over here at the Bridgeport to actually measure how sharp these drill bits are. The way we're going to do that, I've got in here a section of steel box tube. It's just sitting in the vise here. It's not clamped down. The vise just prevents it from rotating as it is drilled. And it's sitting on a scale. You can see as I push on that, it changes the reading over there. We're going to use the Bridgeport's auto feed feature to get an accurate and consistent feed rate. It's set at 15 thou per revolution, which is about right for this high-speed steel drill bit in mild steel tubing. We're going to run it at 1,000 RPMs. I'll do a couple holes of each drill bit just to see, get a nice average there. And I will try to avoid the weld seam that's on this side of the box tube. So let's get to it, drill some holes, and compare to how much force it takes to drill each one. I've got the resharpened bit in here. For each hole, I'm going to put a little dab of Tap Magic aqueous cutting fluid on there just to help lubricate and keep the bit a little cool, and we'll measure what the force is. Okay, so that was an average of 90 pounds. I've got the westward China bit in there now. So that was a little bit lower, right around 85 pounds. We'll switch over to, let's see, this is the CLE bit, which is made in the US. So that was quite a bit higher at about 113, 114 pounds. And then lastly, we'll do the Chicago Latrobe bit, which is also made in the US. That was pretty surprising. Both the Chinese bit and the resharpened bit had a much lower force required to drill those holes at about 90 pounds, 95 pounds, than the two American bits that were brand new that seemed to have a much nicer grind on them. Now it's possible that's because the Chinese and the resharpened bit have a bit of a jagged edge and it starts off real sharp, but as those peaks on those jagged edges wear down, then it's going to very quickly become much duller and require a lot more force, while the two US ones, the CLE and the Chicago Latrobe drill bits, are going to stay at that same cutting force for a lot longer. It's possible I'm just giving them the benefit of the doubt as well, but I was pretty surprised to see that they took a lot higher force there. Regardless, it does seem that resharpening the bit is just as good as one of the Chinese bits and should do reasonably well. Maybe you have to resharpen it a little more frequently, but not that big a deal since you do have the resharpener. I got a piece of oak here. It was a piece of a bar top I was working on. It was a neighborhood tree, so it grew pretty quickly, but it's very hardwood, so we'll try it out on this here. You can see, drills real nice holes, even just being resharpened on that. I really like having this drill doctor. I think it's great for resharpening bits very nicely and quickly. It's great for that kind of in-between size. These, big 3/4 inch and bigger bits, they're easy to, sharpen by hand on a grinding wheel. But when you start getting smaller than that, it gets a little bit fiddly and a little bit harder to do. And it works great for bits in that size range. When you get to the smaller stuff, probably just makes more sense just to replace them, have some on hand as backups, and then you don't have to worry about it. But it is super handy to have when you got to finish a job. You don't want to have to go run out to the store and you just used your last bit, you broke it or you dulled it or something. Very handy to have, and the fact that it'll do any sort of size range, super nice. Do have some complaints though. First is of the build quality. It's pretty good and it's not that expensive a unit, so it's a little hard to complain about this, but I do wish it was built a little bit nicer. The next is how adjustable it is, particularly for the angle of the bit. So they go from 118 all the way up to 140. You just kind of swivel this here, but there's no detents for 118 and 135. It actually goes a little bit past 118. I really wish there was a solid stop at 118, so I was always getting to the exact same spot every time, and then I wouldn't have to worry about taking off more material than I need to. Same at 135. And the last thing is, I wish there was a finer wheel available for it. So it's only got a 180 grit diamond wheel, and you can get replacements for it, and there's a coarser one, there's a 100 grit one. I guess if you wanted to go a little bit faster. It doesn't seem like it takes all that long to me to begin with though. 100 grit one probably lasts a little bit longer too though. Maybe that's the benefit there. I wish there was a finer one though. I would like it to have a nicer grind on the end of the bit, and I don't really care if it takes a little bit longer, and the wheels are not very expensive. I think they were like $20 or $30, so I'd be happy to replace that a little more frequently if it meant that it was doing a better job sharpening. So that's all I have for you today. If you really like this, or if there's something that I missed in this review, leave a comment below. Otherwise, thanks for watching.